The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ranch as Marcus Thompson stepped out onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand. At 42, he had the weathered look of a man who had spent most of his life under the harsh desert sun. His calloused hands told stories of countless days fixing fences, herding cattle, and maintaining the machinery that kept his small operation running. The ranch wasn't much to look at from the outside. A modest two-bedroom house sat in the center of 300 acres of scrubland, surrounded by weathered outbuildings and corrals that had seen better days. But to Marcus, it was everything. It was the only home he had ever known, inherited from his grandfather 15 years ago, when the old man finally succumbed to the lung disease that had been eating away at him for years. Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee and surveyed his domain. 50 head of cattle grazed in the distance, their dark shapes moving slowly across the brown grass. His horses, all 6 of them, stood in the near pasture, occasionally lifting their heads to watch him with curious eyes. The chickens were already busy scratching around the coop, and he could hear his old rooster, Chester, crowing his morning announcement to the world. This was his routine. Every morning for the past 15 years, he would stand on this porch, drink his coffee, and plan his day. He rarely saw another human being except for the monthly trips to town for supplies, and that was exactly how he liked it. People were complicated. They wanted things, expected things, brought drama and noise into a man's life. Animals were different. They were honest. A cow needed food, water, and shelter. A horse needed the same, plus a gentle hand and respect. It was simple. Marcus finished his coffee and set the mug on the porch railing. Time to get to work. The fence in the south pasture needed repair, and 2 of his heifers looked like they might drop their calves any day now. He pulled on his worn work gloves and headed toward the barn. Inside the barn, his favorite horse, a chestnut mare named Rosie, nickered softly when she saw him. Marcus had raised her from a foal, and she had become his most trusted companion over the years. She was smart, sure-footed, and had an uncanny ability to read his moods. "Morning, girl," Marcus said, running his hand along her neck. "Ready for another day?" Rosie pushed her nose against his chest, and Marcus couldn't help but smile. It was one of the few genuine expressions of joy he allowed himself these days. He saddled her quickly and efficiently, the movements automatic after years of practice. As they rode out toward the south pasture, Marcus let his mind wander. The ranch was struggling financially, had been for years. Cattle prices were down, feed costs were up, and the mortgage payments never seemed to get any easier. He had been forced to sell off parcels of land twice in the past 5 years just to keep the bank happy. At this rate, he would lose everything his grandfather had worked so hard to build. But what choice did he have? He wasn't educated beyond high school, and ranching was all he knew. The idea of moving to town, getting some kind of job working for someone else, made his stomach turn. This land, these animals, this way of life? It was who he was. The fence repair took most of the morning. 3 posts had rotted through, and a significant section of wire had been damaged, probably by one of the bulls rubbing against it. Marcus worked methodically, digging new holes, setting new posts, stretching new wire. It was hard, physical work, but it felt good. There was something satisfying about fixing things, about making something broken whole again. By the time he finished, the sun was high overhead and sweat was running down his back despite the October chill in the air. He was just loading his tools back into the saddlebags when he heard something that made him freeze. A gunshot, then another. They were coming from the direction of his house. Marcus swung into the saddle and spurred Rosie into a gallop. His mind raced as they thundered across the pasture. He kept a shotgun in the house and a rifle in the barn, but both were useless if someone had already gotten inside. Who would be shooting on his property? Hunters sometimes wandered onto the ranch by accident, but hunting season didn't start for another month. As they crested the small hill that overlooked his house, Marcus saw a scene that made his blood run cold. A black pickup truck was parked in his driveway, and 3 men were standing near his front porch. One of them was holding what looked like a rifle, and Marcus could see that his front door was hanging open. He reined Rosie to a stop behind a cluster of mesquite trees and tried to think. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and he had no idea who these men were or what they wanted. His nearest neighbor was 8 miles away, and cell phone service was spotty at best out here. He was on his own. Marcus dismounted and tied Rosie to a tree, then began making his way closer on foot, using the outbuildings for cover. As he got nearer, he could hear voices, though he couldn't make out the words. The men seemed relaxed, which was somehow more disturbing than if they had been agitated or nervous. From behind the chicken coop, Marcus got his first clear look at the intruders. They were all young, probably in their 20s, and they had the look of men who were comfortable with violence. 2 of them wore leather vests with patches that Marcus didn't recognize, and all 3 were armed. The one with the rifle was casually pointing it at his chickens, as if deciding whether to shoot them for sport. Marcus felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. These men had invaded his home, his sanctuary, and now they were threatening his animals. He might not have much in this world, but what he had, he would protect. He was trying to figure out how to get to the barn and his rifle when he heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. A dust cloud was visible on the road leading to his ranch, growing larger by the second. The 3 men near his house heard it too and turned to look. The vehicle that pulled into the yard was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. It was a modified pickup truck, painted matte black with heavy steel bumpers and what looked like armor plating on the sides. The windows were tinted so dark that Marcus couldn't see who was inside. The truck came to a stop about 30 yards from the 3 men, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall and lean, with short dark hair and the kind of posture that spoke of military training. She wore dark jeans, combat boots, and a black jacket that hung in a way that suggested she was carrying weapons. But what struck Marcus most was her eyes. Even from his hiding spot, he could see that they were the color of steel and twice as hard. "Afternoon, boys," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the yard. "Looks like you're having a little party. Mind if I join?" The 3 men shifted nervously, and the one with the rifle turned to face her. "This ain't your business, lady. Best move along." The woman smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "See, that's where you're wrong. I make it my business to know about every piece of property in this county. And this particular piece belongs to Marcus Thompson. I don't see Marcus anywhere, which makes me think you boys might not be here by invitation." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Who was this woman, and how did she know his name? "Like I said," the man with the rifle repeated, raising his weapon slightly. "Move along." The woman's smile faded. In one smooth motion, she drew a pistol from somewhere inside her jacket and pointed it at the man's head. The movement was so fast that Marcus barely saw it happen. "I don't think so," she said calmly. "See, I've been watching you 3 knuckleheads for the better part of a week, breaking into houses, stealing whatever isn't nailed down, roughing up anyone who gets in your way, real tough guys, picking on folks who can't fight back." The other 2 men started to reach for their own weapons, but the woman's voice stopped them cold. "I wouldn't," she said without taking her eyes off the man with the rifle. "I've got backup rifles trained on both of you from the tree line. You so much as twitch wrong, and you'll be eating dirt." Marcus looked toward the trees she had indicated, but couldn't see anyone. He wasn't sure if she was bluffing or not, but the 3 men clearly weren't willing to find out. "Now," the woman continued, "here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down your weapons, get in your truck, and drive away. And you're never coming back to this county again. If I see you around here after today, I won't be nearly so polite." The man with the rifle hesitated. and for a moment Marcus thought he might try to call her bluff. But something in the woman's eyes must have convinced him otherwise, because he slowly lowered the weapon and set it on the ground. "That's smart," the woman said. "Now the rest of your hardware." It took several minutes, but eventually all three men had disarmed themselves. The pile of weapons on the ground included 2 pistols, a knife, and what looked like a set of brass knuckles. "Excellent," the woman said. "Now get in your truck and leave. And remember, I'll be watching." The 3 men scrambled toward their vehicle, clearly eager to be gone. The one who had been doing the talking paused at the driver's door. "This ain't over, lady," he called out. The woman's smile returned. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." The black pickup roared to life and kicked up a cloud of dust as it sped away down the dirt road. The woman watched until it was out of sight, then holstered her pistol and turned toward the chicken coop where Marcus was hiding. "You can come out now, Mr. Thompson," she called. "They're gone." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then stepped out from behind the coop. He felt foolish for hiding while a stranger defended his property, but he was also grateful and confused. "How did you know I was there?" he asked as he walked toward her. "I make it my business to know things," she replied. "Plus, your horse is tied up behind those trees over there, and you left tracks in the dust." Marcus looked down at the ground and realized she was right. He wasn't used to trying to hide his movements. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman extended her hand. "Sarah Blake. I'm what you might call a security consultant." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested she was no stranger to hard work. "Security consultant?" "I help people with problems that the local law enforcement can't or won't handle," she explained. "Those 3 you just saw? They've been operating in this area for months. The sheriff's department knows about them, but they're understaffed and outgunned, so people like me fill in the gaps." Marcus nodded toward the pile of weapons on the ground. "What about your backup in the trees?" Sarah grinned. "What backup? Sometimes a good bluff is worth more than actual firepower." Despite everything, Marcus found himself almost smiling. "You could have gotten yourself killed." "Could have," Sarah agreed. "But I didn't. And now you don't have to worry about those particular troublemakers anymore." Marcus looked around at his property, taking stock. The front door was damaged, and he could see that some of his things had been scattered around the porch, but overall the damage seemed minimal. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah nodded. "You're welcome. But I should probably mention that those boys aren't the only problem you've got." Marcus felt his heart sink. "What do you mean?" "Word is getting around about properties like yours. Remote, isolated, minimal security. There are several groups operating in this area, and they share information. Those 3 were just the first." The weight of her words settled on Marcus like a heavy blanket. He had always felt safe on his ranch, protected by the isolation that he had come to love. The idea that his seclusion made him a target had never occurred to him. "So what am I supposed to do?" he asked. "I can't afford private security, and like you said, the sheriff's department is no help." Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Then she seemed to come to some kind of decision. "Actually," she said, "I might have a proposition for you." Marcus waited for her to continue. "I'm between jobs right now, and I need a place to lay low for a while. Somewhere quiet, off the beaten path, where I can disappear for a few months. In exchange, I could provide security for your property. Make sure no more unwanted visitors show up." Marcus stared at her. The idea of having someone else on his ranch, sharing his space, disrupting his carefully ordered routine, made him deeply uncomfortable. On the other hand, the alternative might be losing everything to thieves and vandals. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I'm not really used to having people around." "I get that," Sarah replied. "I'm not exactly the social type myself. I keep to myself, do my job, stay out of your way. Think of me as a really expensive guard dog that can cook its own food." Marcus looked around at his property again, imagining more men with guns showing up, threatening his animals, destroying everything he cared about. Then he looked at Sarah, trying to read her face, trying to decide if he could trust her. "How long are we talking about?" he asked. "Hard to say. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. Depends on how long it takes for certain people to stop looking for me." That should have been a red flag, Marcus realized later. He should have asked who was looking for her and why. But in that moment, faced with the immediate threat to his ranch and his animals, it seemed like a reasonable solution to his problems. "What would you need?" he asked. "Just a place to sleep and basic necessities. I can pay for my own food and anything else I require. All I need from you is a roof over my head and your word that you won't mention my presence here to anyone." Marcus thought about it for several long minutes. The house had a spare bedroom that he never used, and the woman seemed competent and professional. And after what he had just witnessed, he had no doubt that she could handle any future problems with trespassers. "All right," he said finally, "but we need to establish some ground rules." Sarah nodded. "I'm listening. This is my property, and things run a certain way here. I don't want my routines disrupted any more than necessary. I get up at dawn, work until sunset, and go to bed early. I don't drink, I don't party, and I don't appreciate loud noises or drama." "Understood." "And my animals are off limits. You don't touch them, don't feed them, don't interfere with their care in any way. They're my responsibility." "Fair enough." "One more thing," Marcus added. "If you bring trouble to my doorstep, if whoever is looking for you shows up here and threatens my livestock or my property, the deal is off. You leave immediately." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Marcus wondered if he had pushed too hard. But then she nodded. "Those are reasonable terms," she said. "Do we have a deal?" Marcus extended his hand, and she shook it firmly. "We have a deal." As they walked toward the house together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. For 15 years, he had lived in solitude, answering to no one, responsible only for himself and his animals. Now he was about to share his space with a stranger, a woman who carried herself like a soldier and talked about people looking for her. He glanced at Sarah as she surveyed the damage to his front door. She moved with purpose, her eyes constantly scanning for threats, her hand never straying far from where her pistol was concealed. Whatever she was running from, whoever was looking for her, Marcus had the feeling it was serious. But as he looked out at his cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, at his horses standing calmly in their pasture, at the land that represented everything he cared about in the world, he decided he could live with the uncertainty. The alternative, losing everything to criminals and thieves, was unacceptable. Sarah Blake might be a mystery, and their arrangement might be temporary, but for now, she was his best hope for protecting the life he had built. And after 15 years of solitude, Marcus Thompson was about to discover what it was like to have a partner, even if that partnership was built on necessity rather than trust. The sun was beginning to set as they examined the damaged door together, and Marcus realized that this was the longest conversation he had had with another human being in months. Despite his apprehension about the arrangement, he had to admit that it felt good to have someone else around who seemed capable of handling whatever challenges might come their way. Tomorrow would bring new routines, new dynamics. The first week with Sarah Blake on the ranch passed more quietly than Marcus had expected. True to her word, she kept to herself and stayed out of his way. She had moved her few belongings into the spare bedroom, and by the time Marcus woke up each morning, she was already outside, walking the perimeter of the property with the systematic precision of someone conducting a military patrol. Marcus found himself watching her from the kitchen window as he drank his morning coffee. She moved differently than anyone he had ever known, always alert, always ready. even when she seemed relaxed. There was a coiled energy about her, like a spring under tension. She carried herself like someone who had seen combat, and Marcus began to suspect that her military bearing was more than just posture. By the end of the first week, Sarah had identified and cataloged every potential security vulnerability on the ranch. She pointed out places where intruders could approach unseen, weak points in the fence line that could be easily breached, and sight lines that needed to be cleared of brush and debris. Marcus was amazed at how much detail she had absorbed in such a short time. "You've got good natural defenses," she told him one evening as they sat on the front porch after dinner. "The open ground around the house gives you clear fields of fire, and there are only 3 realistic approach routes. But your fence line needs work, and you need some kind of early warning system." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure what she meant by fields of fire. The military terminology was becoming more common in their conversations, and he was beginning to piece together a picture of Sarah's background. "Were you in the army?" he asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Marcus thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq." That explained a lot, Marcus thought. The way she moved, the way she talked, the way she seemed to see threats everywhere. He wanted to ask more, but something in her tone suggested the subject was closed. The second week brought their first test. Marcus was working on the engine of his old tractor when Sarah appeared beside him, moving so quietly that he jumped when she spoke. "We've got company," she said simply. Marcus looked up from the engine and followed her gaze toward the road. A small convoy of vehicles was approaching, moving slowly and kicking up a lot of dust. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell they weren't local. The vehicles were too new, too clean, and they were traveling in formation. "How many?" he asked, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "4 vehicles, probably 12 to 15 people. They're not trying to be stealthy, which means they're either very confident or very stupid." Sarah moved toward the house, and Marcus followed. She went directly to her room and emerged a few moments later carrying a rifle case and what looked like a military-style backpack. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. "Stay in the house and keep your head down. This is what you're paying me for." The vehicles pulled into the ranch yard and arranged themselves in a rough semicircle facing the house. Sarah was already in position behind the water trough near the barn, her rifle resting on a bipod, and aimed at the lead vehicle. Marcus watched from the kitchen window, his heart pounding. The doors of the vehicles opened, and men began piling out. They were better dressed and better organized than the 3 troublemakers from the week before, but they had the same hard look about them. Several were openly carrying weapons. A man in an expensive suit stepped forward from the group. He was older than the others, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the soft look of someone who had spent most of his life behind a desk, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. "Sarah Blake," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "I know you're here. Let's talk." Sarah's response came from behind the water trough, her voice steady and professional. "Mr. Kellerman, I was wondering when you'd show up." So she knew who these people were, Marcus realized. Whatever trouble she was running from, it had just found her. "You cost me a lot of money in Denver," the man called Kellerman continued. "My employers are not happy." "Your employers were running guns to cartels and trafficking children," Sarah replied. "I sleep just fine knowing I cost you money." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Gun running and child trafficking. What had he gotten himself into? "That's all ancient history," Kellerman said. "Water under the bridge. What matters now is that you took something that doesn't belong to you. Something my employers want back." "I didn't take anything," Sarah said. "I copied it. There's a difference. The hard drives, Sarah. You know what I'm talking about. Bank account numbers, transaction records, client lists. My employers have been very patient, but their patience is running out." Marcus could see Sarah's position from the window, and he noticed that her rifle was tracking from target to target, never staying in one place for more than a few seconds. She was outnumbered more than 10-1, but she didn't seem concerned. "Here's my counteroffer," Sarah called back. "You and your friends get back in your vehicles and leave. In return, I don't kill all of you right now." Several of the men laughed, but Kellerman didn't seem amused. "You're outnumbered, Sarah, and you're protecting a civilian now. That changes the equation." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. They knew about him, knew he was here. Somehow, that made everything more real and more dangerous. "You're right," Sarah said. "It does change things. It means I have something to protect, which makes me much more dangerous than usual." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but something changed the dynamic. One of Kellerman's men, a young guy with too much confidence and not enough brains, decided to try to flank Sarah's position. He started moving around the side of the barn, probably thinking he was being clever. Sarah saw him immediately. Without warning, she put a bullet into the ground 6 inches from his feet. The sharp crack of the rifle shot echoed across the ranch, and the man dove for cover behind a pile of feed sacks. "Next one goes center mass," Sarah called out calmly. The message was clear, and everyone in the yard got it. This wasn't a game, and Sarah Blake wasn't someone who made empty threats. Kellerman held up a hand, signaling his men to stay put. "Impressive shooting, but you can't stay here forever, Sarah. Sooner or later, you'll have to come out." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But I've got food, water, and ammunition for weeks. How long can you afford to sit in my front yard?" It was a good point, Marcus realized. These men looked like city types, not the kind who would be comfortable camping out in the desert for an extended period. And the longer they stayed, the more likely it was that someone would notice and ask questions. "Besides," Sarah continued, "every minute you spend here is another minute for my insurance policy to work." "What insurance policy?" Kellerman demanded. "Let's just say that if anything happens to me, those hard drives you're so worried about automatically get uploaded to about 50 different law enforcement agencies and news organizations. Dead man switch, Mr. Kellerman. You kill me, and everyone knows about your employer's business activities within 24 hours. Marcus could see the calculation happening in Kellerman's eyes. Whatever was on those hard drives, it was obviously damaging enough that his employers couldn't afford to have it made public. "You're bluffing," Kellerman said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Am I? Are you willing to bet your employer's freedom on that assumption?" The standoff continued for another 20 minutes, with neither side willing to make the first move. Finally, Kellerman seemed to reach a decision. "This isn't over, Sarah," he called out. "My employers have long memories and deep pockets. They'll find another way." "I'm sure they'll try," Sarah replied. "But I'll be ready when they do." The men began getting back into their vehicles, though Marcus noticed that several of them kept their weapons ready and their eyes on Sarah's position. They were professional enough to know better than to turn their backs on a sniper. Within minutes, the convoy was heading back down the road, leaving only dust clouds and tire tracks as evidence they had ever been there. Sarah stayed in position for another 10 minutes, watching the road through her rifle scope, before finally standing up and safing her weapon. Marcus came out of the house, his legs feeling shaky with leftover adrenaline. "Are they gone?" "For now," Sarah said, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "But they'll be back. Kellerman's employers don't give up easily." "What did you take from them?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her deciding how much to tell him. "Financial records," she said finally. "Evidence of money laundering, arms dealing, and human trafficking. Enough to put about 50 people in federal prison for the rest of their lives." "Why haven't you turned it over to the authorities already?" "Because half the people on those lists are the authorities," Sarah said bitterly. "Cops, judges, politicians. I need to be very careful about who I trust with this information." Marcus felt like the ground was shifting underneath his feet. He had agreed to provide temporary shelter for someone who needed to lay low for a while. He hadn't signed up to be in the middle of a war between criminals and vigilantes. "Look," Sarah said, apparently reading his expression, "I understand if you want me to leave. This isn't what you bargained for." Marcus thought about it seriously. The smart thing would be to tell her to pack her bags and get off his property before she brought any more trouble to his doorstep. His animals didn't deserve to be put at risk because he had gotten involved in something that was none of his business. But then he looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw something that surprised him. Under the military bearing and the professional competence, she looked tired. Not physically tired, but soul-deep exhausted. Like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "How long have you been fighting this fight?" he asked. 3 years, she said quietly. "Ever since I stumbled onto their operation while working a security job in Denver, I've been gathering evidence, staying one step ahead of them, trying to find someone in law enforcement I can trust." 3 years of running and hiding, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. "It gets old after a while." Marcus made his decision. "You can stay." Sarah looked surprised. "Even after what just happened? Even knowing what you're getting into?" Marcus thought about his grandfather, who had built this ranch with his own hands and taught Marcus the value of hard work and integrity. He thought about his animals, who depended on him to keep them safe. And he thought about Sarah, who had been fighting a lonely battle against some very bad people for 3 years. "Those men you're fighting," he said. "They hurt children?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Among other things." "Then you're doing the right thing," Marcus said simply. "And I'm not going to turn my back on someone who's doing the right thing." Something changed in Sarah's expression, a subtle softening that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "Thank you," she said quietly. That evening, they sat on the porch together as the sun set over the ranch. It was becoming a routine, Marcus realized, these quiet conversations at the end of the day. For someone who had lived alone for 15 years, he was surprised by how comfortable it felt. "Tell me about your grandfather," Sarah said suddenly. Marcus glanced at her, surprised by the question. "What do you want to know? You mentioned he built this ranch. What was he like?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering. "He was the strongest man I ever knew, but not in the way you might think. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper, never gave up on anything or anyone. When my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, he took me in without hesitation, never made me feel like I was a burden." "What did he teach you?" "That a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to sacrifice to protect what matters to him. That animals deserve better treatment than most people give them. That hard work and honesty will see you through most problems." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "He sounds like a good man." "The best," Marcus agreed. "He would have liked you." "I think." "Why?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Because you're willing to put yourself at risk to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's exactly the kind of person he respected." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out overhead. Marcus found himself thinking about how different his life had become in just 2 weeks. The solitude he had treasured for so long now seemed less important than having someone he could trust watching his back. "Marcus," Sarah said eventually. "Yeah? When this is over, when I've found a way to get that evidence into the right hands, I want you to know that these 2 weeks have meant a lot to me. It's been a long time since I felt like I had a home." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "This will always be your home," he said. "Even after your business is finished, you'll always have a place here." Sarah looked at him in the starlight, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. For just a moment, the professional mask slipped, and he saw the woman underneath, someone who had been alone for too long, carrying burdens that no one should have to carry by themselves. "I might take you up on that," she said softly. As they said goodnight and went to their separate bedrooms, Marcus realized that his carefully ordered life had been changed forever. Sarah Blake had brought danger to his doorstep, but she had also brought something else, the possibility of a future he had never dared to imagine. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch continued as they always had. Cattle lowing softly in the distance, the occasional nicker of a horse, the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush. But for the first time in 15 years, Marcus Thompson wasn't facing the challenges of ranch life alone. And despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring, that felt like the most important change of all. 3 days after Kellerman's visit, Marcus woke up to find Sarah already gone from the house. Her room was empty, her gear was missing, and there was no sign of her anywhere on the property. For a moment, panic seized his chest. Had something happened to her? Had Kellerman's people come back during the night and taken her? Then he found the note on the kitchen table, written in Sarah's precise handwriting. "Gone to town. Back by sunset. Keep your eyes open. S." Marcus spent the day in a state of nervous energy he hadn't experienced in years. Every sound made him look up from his work. Every movement in his peripheral vision made his heart race. He realized with uncomfortable clarity just how much he had come to depend on Sarah's presence, not just for security, but for companionship. When her black pickup truck appeared on the road just as the sun was touching the horizon, Marcus felt a relief so profound it surprised him. Sarah parked near the house and got out, carrying a large duffel bag and wearing an expression that somehow managed to be both grim and satisfied. "How did it go?" Marcus asked as she approached the porch. "Better than I hoped," Sarah replied. "I made contact with someone I can trust." She set the duffel bag down and sat heavily in one of the porch chairs. For the first time since Marcus had known her, she looked truly tired. "Tell me," he said. Sarah was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "There's a federal prosecutor in Phoenix named Janet Morrison. Clean as a whistle, got a reputation for going after corruption no matter how high it reaches. I've been trying to get to her for months, but every time I got close, Kellerman's people would show up." "What changed?" "You," Sarah said simply. "Having a secure base, somewhere I could plan and prepare without constantly looking over my shoulder. It made all the difference." She opened the duffel bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are copies of everything. Bank records, transaction logs, communications between Kellerman's employers and their clients. Morrison has the originals now, along with digital copies on encrypted drives." Marcus looked at the papers, realizing he was looking at evidence that would probably destroy dozens of lives and criminal enterprises. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," Sarah said. "Morrison will need time to verify everything and coordinate with other agencies. But she assured me that by this time next week, federal agents will be making arrests from here to Washington, D.C. "And Kellerman?" "He's probably already running. Morrison's people picked up chatter this afternoon about his organization pulling back from their normal operations. They know something's coming." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. "So it's over?" Sarah nodded slowly. "The immediate threat is over. Kellerman's employers will have bigger problems to worry about than chasing one former Marine around the desert." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Marcus found himself trying to imagine what life would be like now, whether Sarah would stay or move on to whatever came next in her complicated life. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said suddenly. Marcus looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For bringing this mess to your doorstep, for putting you and your animals at risk. When I made this arrangement, I told myself it was a fair trade, security for shelter. But the truth is, I was selfish. I was tired of running, tired of sleeping in motels and looking over my shoulder every minute of every day. I wanted a place where I could feel safe, even if it was just temporary. Sarah, let me finish, she said. You could have been killed yesterday. Those men weren't playing games, and it would have been my fault. Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. 3 weeks ago, if someone had told me that a stranger would show up at my ranch, bring a bunch of armed criminals to my front door, and turn my quiet life upside down, I would have said they were crazy. Sarah's expression grew more pained. Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm not finished, he said gently. 3 weeks ago, I thought I had everything I needed. This ranch, my animals, my routine. I thought I was content. He paused, looking out at the pasture where his horses stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. But I wasn't content, he continued. I was just existing. Going through the motions day after day, year after year. I had forgotten what it felt like to care about something beyond my own little world. Sarah looked at him intently, and Marcus could see her trying to understand where he was going with this. You didn't just bring trouble to my ranch, he said. You brought purpose. You gave me a chance to be part of something that mattered, to help fight against people who hurt innocent victims. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like my life had meaning beyond just keeping cattle fed and fences repaired. But the danger made me realize something important, Marcus interrupted. I've been so focused on avoiding risk, on keeping my world small and safe, that I forgot how to really live. My grandfather didn't build this ranch by playing it safe. He built it by taking chances, by standing up for what was right, by protecting what mattered to him. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Marcus had ever heard it. What are you saying? Marcus took a deep breath. This was harder than facing down armed intruders, harder than anything he had done in years. I'm saying that I don't want you to leave, he said. Not because I need protection, and not because I'm afraid of being alone again. I want you to stay because this place is better with you in it. I'm better with you in it. Sarah stared at him in the gathering darkness, and Marcus couldn't read her expression. For a moment he wondered if he had misunderstood everything, if he had mistaken professional partnership for something more personal. Then Sarah smiled. A real smile that transformed her entire face. You know, she said, I've been a lot of places in the past 3 years. Lived in hotels and motels and safe houses from here to the Canadian border. But this is the first place that ever felt like home. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Sarah said, if you'll have me. The next morning brought a new routine. Marcus woke to find Sarah already in the kitchen, making coffee and looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her. She was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of her usual tactical gear, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. Good morning, she said as Marcus shuffled into the kitchen. Morning, he replied, accepting the cup of coffee she handed him. Sleep well? Better than I have in years, she admitted. It's amazing what a clear conscience and a secure future can do for your rest. They spent the morning working together on ranch chores, and Marcus was impressed by how quickly Sarah adapted to the work. She had a natural way with animals, and the horses in particular seemed to take to her immediately. Even Chester, his cantankerous old rooster, seemed less aggressive when she was around. You've done this before? Marcus observed as he watched her expertly check the hooves of his mare, Rosie. My uncle had a small ranch in Montana, Sarah explained. I spent summers there when I was a kid. Before the Marines, before everything else, I thought I might want to be a veterinarian. What changed your mind? Sarah's expression darkened slightly. September 11th happened when I was a senior in high school. changed a lot of plans for a lot of people. Marcus understood. He had been in his 20s when the towers fell, and he remembered the surge of patriotism and anger that had swept the country. For someone Sarah's age, it must have shaped everything that came after. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. "About joining the Marines? No. About what came after, some days. But if I hadn't gone down that path, I never would have been in a position to stop Kellerman's people, and I never would have ended up here." They were interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Marcus felt his heart jump, but Sarah remained calm. "It's okay," she said. "I've been expecting them." 3 black SUVs pulled into the ranch yard, and a small army of people in FBI jackets got out. Leading them was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone accustomed to dealing with serious crimes. "Miss Blake," the woman said as she approached. "I'm Special Agent Morrison. We spoke yesterday." "Agent Morrison?" Sarah replied. "Thank you for coming." Morrison looked around the ranch with professional interest. "This is where you've been hiding for the past month?" "This is where I've been staying," Sarah corrected. "Mr. Thompson was kind enough to provide accommodation in exchange for security services." Morrison looked at Marcus with curiosity. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you've been harboring a federal witness without knowing it." Marcus felt a flash of irritation at the woman's tone. "I've been providing shelter to someone who was trying to do the right thing," he said firmly. "If that makes me guilty of something, then I guess I'm guilty." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "It doesn't make you guilty of anything, Mr. Thompson. In fact, what you've done probably helped save a lot of lives." She turned back to Sarah. "We made the first arrests this morning. Kellerman's boss, 3 of his lieutenants, and about a dozen associates. We also raided 4 different properties and seized enough evidence to keep prosecutors busy for years." "What about Kellerman himself?" Sarah asked. "Still in the wind, but we'll find him. His financial assets are frozen, his organization is scattered, and he's got nowhere to run." Sarah nodded, looking satisfied. "Good." Morrison handed Sarah a business card. "If you're interested, the Bureau could use someone with your skills and experience. We've got an opening in our organized crime task force." Sarah glanced at Marcus, then back at Morrison. "Thank you, but I think I'm done with that life. I've got other plans now." Morrison looked between Sarah and Marcus, and understanding dawned on her face. "I see. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands." After the federal agents left, Marcus and Sarah found themselves alone again on the ranch. The immediate crisis was over. The bad guys were in custody, and the evidence had been turned over to the proper authorities. Everything had worked out exactly as they had hoped. "So, what happens now?" Marcus asked as they sat on the porch that evening. Sarah looked out at the pasture where his cattle were grazing peacefully in the fading light. "Now we figure out what comes next. I've got some money saved up from my security work. I could help with improvements to the ranch, maybe expand the operation. What about your old life? Don't you miss the excitement?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I spent 3 years running from danger and toward danger, sometimes on the same day. I'm tired of excitement. I want peace. I want routine. I want to wake up every morning knowing that the biggest crisis I'll face is whether the fence in the south pasture needs repair." Marcus smiled. "You might get bored." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, "but somehow I doubt it." That night, as Marcus lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of his ranch, he thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The solitude he had prized for so long had been replaced by partnership. The predictable routine of his days now included conversation and companionship. The future, which had once seemed like an endless repetition of the same isolated existence, now held possibilities he couldn't have imagined. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same spot on his porch, where he had first seen Sarah drive away the three troublemakers who had started everything. But now Sarah was standing beside him, her hand resting comfortably in his, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. The ranch looked different now. New fences marked the boundaries of expanded pastures. A new barn housed additional horses they had purchased together. The house itself had been renovated, with a larger kitchen and an office where Sarah could manage the business side of their growing operation. "Regrets?" Sarah asked, echoing the question he had asked her months earlier. Marcus looked around at his transformed life, at the woman who had brought danger and disruption and ultimately purpose to his quiet world, and smiled. "Not a single one," he said. As the last light faded from the western sky, Marcus Thompson realized that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as the worst problems. Sometimes a stranger offering protection in exchange for shelter could become the most important person in your world, and sometimes a man who thought he needed nothing more than his animals and his solitude could discover that what he really needed was someone to share it all with. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful in the way that had always comforted Marcus. But it was a different kind of quiet, the quiet of a life fully lived rather than a life simply endured. And that, Marcus thought as he squeezed Sarah's hand gently, made all the difference in the world.